is Notsam Wrestling.
Introducing your host from New York, here is Sam Roberts.
I'm really happy to be doing this in studio. The minds, the creative minds, the everything really behind what the NWA is in 2019 and really over the last, I guess, 2 years, 3 years?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Billy Corgan and Dave Lagana together. And I mean,
Is this our first
It's our first
co-interview?
one we've never done. When I talked to Sam, I was like, "Do you want us both?" And that sounded dirty, and I thought we would. Why not?
All right.
why don't you usually do them together? Like, do you shy away, Dave?
We're just not in the same place very often. So if I'm doing an interview, he's usually in studio or vice versa, and we try to kind of split the difference with everybody.
I see.
So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Spread, and you can hit the most ground that way.
Yes.
You guys have to be so happy with what's gone on with Power, because it feels like one of these things that just, let's put it on YouTube and see if it works. And I mean, if you look at the week-to-week numbers, they're amazing. If you look at the fan reaction, both from fans and from people within wrestling, everybody is just like falling in love with this show, it feels like.
It's been a real pleasure and a revelation, because you can guess what you have, but until you see real numbers and real response, you don't really know. We're really proud that we trusted our talent to be in that situation, because it is a situation because of the live audience and the nature of how things go these days with social media, where you can totally fall on your face. And we had to calculate that there are going to be those moments that just don't work. But we're willing to take that chance. And I think once talent saw the crowd reaction and the vibe in the studio to what we were doing, you can almost see their lights start to go on, like, oh, this is kind of fun. This is a bit different. And then by the second day, the talent was completely invested. And I think the shows have gotten better because you see the talent sort of buying in. And we're about to enter another taping cycle. We have the pay-per-view on December 14th and 2 tapings on the 15th and 16th of December. And so we're looking forward, because now we feel like we kind of know what we have. And I think the talent will come in even with a more excited attitude, because I think they're going to have a better idea what they want to do in that environment.
Yeah, it's rare that you get people to show up without really knowing what they're getting into. Even the people that bought tickets to our first show, they didn't know what they're getting into, and I think I had said something to the effect of, we don't even know what's going to happen. There were a lot of situations like the question mark. The audience reaction to the question mark was a 180. We had no idea, and so
right.
the guys had to figure it out. The match that airs on this week's show completely got redone in the fly to work with what the audience was doing, and we couldn't have stopped it if we wanted to. Even if we wanted to try and manipulate it, we just couldn't have.
Well, it's little things, too. It's like doing the promos live, obviously, the way they used to be done, leaves you with moments where Eli Drake is doing this promo, and the fans are chanting question mark, and when he takes a pause to see what they're chanting and realizes it's question mark, I was like, in my head I'm watching, I'm going, well, how's he going to deal with this? Because they're like kind of doing this fun thing, but he's trying to get this message across, and his ability to go question mark into exclamation and then get them on his side was like, yeah, this is one of those lost arts of wrestling, of really on the fly making the audience go on the journey that you intend for them to go on.
This show is closer to Saturday Night Live than a pro wrestling show, as far as, we can lay out an improv-like type environment, and then what happens ends up happening, and we just go with it. And we're always kind of tweaking the show when it's done. I think it was the second episode. We had that interview with Camille and Nick and the clickbait stuff, and after we looked at the first cut, we're like, it just doesn't work. Let's reorder everything. We shot new scenes, and it's a living, breathing thing. I mean, the show usually gets done about 11 a.m. on Tuesday, with just kind of to get it where it needs to be, and it's really unlike anything I've done in 19 years of doing wrestling, and there's nothing like it on television, the internet, as far as the way it's being produced.
Yeah. So how important were the numbers? Like, were there expectations for numbers? Because I think people also have this perception of a lot of what you guys are doing, especially because you're kind of the figurehead behind this thing, Billy, that people feel like, well, Billy Corgan is this, successful rock star, so he can just invest this money into this wrestling hobby, and if it works, then great, and if not, he's having a lark. Is that...
Well, that's a lot of money for a lark.
That's what I figure.
Let me tell you. I think I've been working on the professional side of professional wrestling now going on about 7 or 8 years. Invested a lot of time which, you know, if you want to put a dollar value to my time, I mean, do that math alone. Just, you know, just the meetings, the plane flights, the phone calls.
I mean, doing stuff like this interview while you're here to do music, right?
Yeah. I mean, people say, where do you find time to do wrestling? And it's like, it's on top of my musical life. And I have a very, very busy life, and I'm also a parent. So I love it. I love the business, and I plan on being successful in the business. And the people I talk to behind the scenes, you know, I talk to some of the biggest companies in the world. Now, if I get that phone call because I'm me, I'm on that phone call to figure out how to create a business model that they'll be attracted to. It's not because they just want to talk to me.
Right.
I don't want to waste these people's time, and they certainly don't want to waste my time. So I think that narrative of like, somebody playing in the sandbox of wrestling, I think that's quickly eroded. And the most notable thing I would point to is that I'm not on the product. You know, you don't see my face every 5 seconds. I'm not out there cutting promos. I don't really even want to be on the product if I can help it, because I really want it to be about our talent. This is, you know, look, I love the NWA. I love the opportunity that it presents, but it is a business, and we plan on being very successful in it. And, you know, we talk about a 20-year plan, and so we're very excited about the numbers we've had, because it's better than we could have hoped. And it's not just that, you know, there are raw numbers, you know, everybody can point to. But, you know, the Pumpkins put out an album in 2007 that went gold, you know, sold over 500,000 copies in an environment where it's hard to sell 500,000 copies, but people didn't like the record. So what good were the numbers, you know? The good news is that people really, really like the NWA Power product. And we think as it gets better, we'll attract a bigger audience. And we're very much geared towards a more mainstream audience, because that's where we see the real growth. Those lapsed fans, those people who are not in the wrestling bubble following everything that somebody's tweeting. There's a huge, huge audience out there that wants classic professional wrestling done in the modern style. And we plan on going after that segment and bring them back to the table, because it's a strong wrestling economy, but it's not as strong as it should or could be.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because when I've watched the show, I'll watch it on my laptop, my phone, or whatever, and my wife will kind of walk in the room, and she's not a wrestling fan at all, but she's obviously...
Is that why you married her?
Yeah.
To have some other place to go.
So there can be something else to life, right?
One thing, right? Yeah.
But obviously she's more familiar with this world than just about anyone who could ever say that they're not a fan. And just in hearing it, she wasn't watching it at all, but just in hearing it as she walked by, she was hearing the promos. And she was like, well, that sounds different. It was almost like, and she didn't want to say it because she didn't want to be disrespectful to anybody, but her reaction was, oh, I guess that's what they're supposed to sound like, you know? And I think that real quick, people figure that out when watching.
Yeah, sorry to jump in on this, but I feel like, I've been saying it for a few years, but, you know, UFC effectively took the classic wrestling promo model and they brought it into the modern world, and how are they able to add real fuel to it? Well, the promos, at least allegedly, were real, right? You know, it was a real fight, and there were real consequences. Of course, once I saw about 40 UFC fights where the guys were hugging at the end after they had just been viciously cutting each other up in promos, I started realizing the guys had figured out that by working, Conor McGregor being a great example, by working they could sell more tickets. More power to him. Right. Everything is professional wrestling,
especially when you literally are watching UFC and you're hearing superstar Billy Graham, or you're hearing The Rock.
Oh,
or
yeah.
Yeah.
God bless. Yeah, God bless. But what I felt was that the wrestling business as a whole was slow to adapt to the new pace that UFC had set.
Right.
And I think by bringing it back to that kind of unscripted, in-your-face, hey, maybe I'm going to stumble over my words, but there's real emotion behind it, that will sell this better than if I give this perfectly delivered soliloquy, which somebody's not buying in the 14th row because it just sounds like somebody else wrote it, not the person talking. So I'm all about it. I mean, people ask how much of our promos are scripted, and the answer is they're not. We literally just hand talents bullet points and say, go out and say whatever you want to say. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, there's not even a time limit. It's just go out there and just cut your promo, and if you're on a roll, keep going.
Right.
Just go.
The perfect example is Tim Storm on the first show.
Mm-hmm.
Tim's that uncle you just really hope does well. You know, you like there was a great tweet somebody said, Tim's the father I never had that I don't want to disappoint. And you know, that first promo, he starts to quote Eminem in a way that's just like, what? But it's like he's so likable and the people love him that it comes across. And that's, we told Tim, hey, this is what we were looking for, and he just did it. And like Billy said, our show could be 12 minutes or it could be 59 minutes and 59 seconds. We're not bound by anything. And I think that's really the cool part. If something comes out of the show, it's out of the show because it's not good for the pace or the character. We don't have to hit 3 hours. We don't have to hit 2 hours. And I think that allows our talents to feel free and to go.
How hard is it to find this line between the kitsch of doing this old school thing and almost the humor value in it and creating something that people are taking seriously?
And that's a fantastic question. I would say we're entering a world where there really is no line anymore. We have a president that cuts promos. I watch, quote unquote, real sports, and they're cutting wrestling promos. I watch very, very talented people in the wrestling business cut very, very serious promos, and then I look on their social media and they're hugging backstage because they went to do something that was really admirable, like a charity event or something. So are we supposed to believe, then not believe, then believe or not believe? Are we supposed to always live in the universe? I think Hollywood is a good example of they gave up that ghost long ago. There was a time between the 19-teens and the 1950s where Hollywood stars were really protected. In essence, they were always in kayfabe mode.
Right.
They made sure they didn't look or do anything that was out of character with what the public wanted to believe because it was good for business. And then, of course, they lost control of that narrative with the coming of the modern media, tabloid, the National Enquirers and stuff like that. So I think we're in a world now where I guess I would say it, and it's not a dodge of the question. I'd just say if you believe it, you believe it, and if you don't, you don't. And it's really more on the talents to make you believe. I used to meet people in airports in the 90s that would be disappointed because I liked basketball, because they wanted me to be in some kind of goth, sad state all the time, because that was the character that they believed in the music.
Yeah.
And I always would kind of bristle at that, like, why can't I also be a human being who's funny and dumb and silly and a jerk? Human beings are very complex individuals. I think entertainment tends to dumb things down. I would lean towards more sophistication. So, yeah, there are times when I watch our programming where we're right on the line of what is this?
Yes.
And I think that's and I'm not taking it as critique, but I'm saying that's a criticism worth considering. Like, where is the line? We turned to each other during those first tapings and we said this is like a weird combination of like Springer and Georgia Championship Live or something. Like, we're entering some sort of new territory, and I don't think we have enough data to say what is and isn't working. But I can tell you, and I don't mean this as criticism of other people's products, I have a hard time as a wrestling fan in 2019 believing that the same people that I saw on social media hugging backstage are now in some massive blood feud. So either there's got to be some contrivance that I buy into that takes me on a particular journey, and if humor is part of that journey, then fine. But there's got to be some contrivance that doesn't ask me to completely suspend disbelief when the chance of me doing that because their acting ability isn't that great and they don't have the contrivance of a major motion picture CGI thing happening around them and they can shoot lightning out of the ends of their fingers or something. I just feel like I'm not answering the question well, but I'm saying the world is so amorphous. I don't think we have those answers yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you watch, and I think it does a good job, because that's something that I was watching for, was like, there's plenty of tongue-in-cheek stuff, whether it's in the ads, or whatever it is, but then when you start getting the story part of it, whether it's in the promos or in the matches themselves, and the commentators and everything, you fall into the story, so you're not in that tongue-in-cheek world anymore. And then I start to look at it even differently, and I look at the Nick Aldis commercial for the video game, and I go, yeah, like, this is obviously funny and completely tongue-in-cheek, but it's still the same character that I believe in. So, like, somehow I'm in this kind of weird vortex where this thing I can acknowledge is like, okay, this is irony, but it's the character still.
Yeah, I would say, look, let's use an example of Michael Jordan or LeBron James. Can I believe that they're able to do charity? Can I believe that they're a killer on the basketball court when they blow the first whistle to start the game. Can I believe that they're capable of being a heel and a babyface depending on the situation? Can they be serious when they need to be serious, and can they be silly when they need to be silly? The fact that Peyton Manning did funny commercials, did that take away from his ability to win a Super Bowl? Mm-hmm. What I'm saying? It's like, I think we live in a different world now where you have to, I guess what I would say is, if you believe in the person navigating the car of the personality, whether it's worked or not, are you willing to take that journey? And I would say the rough edges around, like, did the girl really shoot the dragon out of the sky in Game of Thrones? Well, that gets into like the idea of, like, are you a mark, and are you willing to believe something which is patently not real? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like, like, where is your line of markdom?
Because there was even that moment in that Camille Nick sit down in the second show, and I turned to him, I was like, I don't even know what we're looking at. Like, it's so, like, because the audience is going, why isn't she talking? We know she can talk.
Yeah.
So now it leaves a lot more questions. And I think the upside for us is we leave a lot up to the audience's interpretation. The end of last week's show was half of a fix of something that didn't work, constricted down time-wise to make it feel important. But then I looked at the YouTube numbers. We had a giant spike of people going back to watch that one moment trying to figure it out. So it's like a mistake or something that we didn't love ended up becoming something that people were very curious on, and it moves forward. So it's unlike anything else, where in my time in WWE, every moment is decided from you lift your left hand here, you put your right foot here. It's laid out. We find moments, and if it doesn't work, we take it out, or we expand upon it, or we just go with it. And I think that's what allows this universe to feel completely different.
Yeah, it's really nice. The storytelling mechanism, I think, allows that more with you guys than just about anything else, in the sense that you can, like you said, you can do 2 days of tapings that'll cover 6 weeks or whatever it's going to cover, and then kind of take that footage, and if you want to tell a different story with it than you originally intended, you kind of can. Or if you have a moment like you had where this was a mistake and the fans are thinking it's this thing, you can now go, okay, let's kind of follow that wave. Let's go with them. Yeah, how often do you see yourself doing that?
I think it just depends, and obviously, these shows were constructed in a bubble, and until we walked in the room, until the room was built, we both walked the room and we had an idea of what it would look like, but I was there from the room was empty to completely until he showed up, and it's in that documentary we did. We kind of started to feel it, and like when he walked in, and then when talents walked in, there was a discussion on music. Even up until 5 minutes before Nick and Tim went out, they were wondering, do we have music? And we're like, he was very steadfast on it. He's like, no, just try it. And that awkwardness became part of the thing, and then nobody thinks about it now. And
I think it's great. I think the same thing with the ring announcements, where it's not that like ring announcery voice. It's like it takes you. It's those little details that do take you back.
Well, it focuses on the talent, and it's really a very raw performance of them. And I think as a talent, you want that. And for us, it's what we can offer. We cannot offer the same money that Tony Khan and Vince offer. We can't offer the same exposure that this network or that does, but we can offer a chance to really be a fully formed, and all of the people on this show are here for a reason, and they're not somewhere else for a different reason, and those thoughts collide, and everyone goes, well, why hasn't Eddie Kingston been on TV for 10 years?
Yes.
And then, but you see his talent and go, there's nobody who can talk like him. And the same with Eli and Nick and James Storm and everybody. It's like, it's such a full roster of guys that should be other places, but here it works very well.
Was it your guys' idea for Homicide to wear the NWA?
I think that was Homicide's idea.
Because it's brilliant. It's like it's completely brilliant. How did you pick the talent when you guys started? Because, we've all had conversations about what NWA was when you guys started it, and it was really first Tim Storm, obviously, but Nick Aldis going show to show, town to town, and just kind of representing the brand. When you guys go, okay, we're going to do TV tapings, we're going to start to build this into a promotion, and you do see people that you're familiar with. I mean, obviously being on the East Coast, Eddie Kingston, Homicide, Thunder Rosa, but then to see Trevor Murdoch pop up, to see, Sandow pop up again, to see these guys that I wasn't sure if they were even still around doing stuff. What was that process of picking who's going to be on these shows?
Well, we take kind of we call it like the Belichick Patriots approach. It's more of a team concept. Can you put these pieces together so they're complementary, so everybody benefits? If we were too toppy heavy and you had, let's say, 4 A-level talents and everybody else was basically there to sell for the A-level talents, I don't think that's a product worth watching. So my thought is, and I think, it's kind of like, I'm paraphrasing the Patriots idea. You want to find those talents in the market that are undervalued, and by presenting them at their top value, the natural reaction of a fan watching is like, oh, this is kind of interesting. There's more here than I thought. And I have that reaction, and I'm sitting there, and I've helped put it together.
Right.
Trevor Murdoch, who I was a fan of when he was in the WWE, David called me and said, what do you think about using him? I said, absolutely. Love his size, definitely can work. What's he been doing lately? So we talked about that. As soon as you see him on the television, it's like, there it is.
Yeah.
There's that experience. There's a reason he got over when he was over. It's right there in front of you. And then we don't, because we respect Trevor's position in the business, we're not asking him to jump through 45 hoops and prove anything to us. He doesn't have to prove anything to us. He's there because we already believe in him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Nick and I went to Harley Race's funeral, and he was there, and I pulled him aside after. I said, "What are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Like, what?" He's like, "Oh, I work here." And I said, "Why aren't you wrestling?" He goes, "The business is passing by." I said, "No, it hasn't." I said, "Come to Atlanta." He goes, "What are you gonna do?" I said, "I don't know. We'll figure it out." I said, "You'll be an agent. I've known him literally from WWE. He was one of the first guys I worked outside of the WWE, and he just cares. He's a great trainer, and it's his details. And when you look at his matches, he has such details to what he does. And the match he has with Nick tonight is just it's an unbelievable piece of business is the best way to describe it. And there's a place in the market for this for us. And where it goes, that's the best part, because this has been literally our journey since we escaped TNA like a plot from Escape from New York. It it allowed us. We have no idea. We're just kind of. I always say we're building this plane as we fly using duct tape, spit, and bubble gum. And sometimes a hole will open the side of the plane, and we just gotta we'll put Josephus in the hole and see what happens.
Yeah.
And it's unlike anything, and I think that's why it works.
When you guys did your grand escape of TNA, did you do it together with this in mind? Not necessarily all of this, but just sort of like, let's kind of leave this and see, or were you both just two individuals going, we got to get the hell out of here?
It was definitely separate, because his reason for leaving was, he had invested $1.8 million to a lovely Southern lady who was, we call it Game of Thrones. She was working 6 sides to keep herself in play. Mm-hmm. I was watching as an employee. When they fired him the day after the Cubs won the World Series and he was at the game, I called him and said, I think you just got fired. They send a mass email. He's like, huh? And he called his lawyer and that. And so I got a phone call 4 hours after from my boss saying, they want to know what you plan to do. I said, I'm an employee. I've done nothing wrong. I plan on being here. Mm-hmm. And so I talked to him the next day, and I said, well, this is what I'm thinking. And I went to John Gaborik's house, and I had a long call with Matt Conway, who was my writing partner, and I said, I'm probably leaving, and just to let him know, because he's the only person that he and I really trusted there the whole time. And he's like, well, listen, my wife's having a baby in 6 weeks. I can't leave yet. I said, that's fine. I said, I'm just letting you know we're going. I go to quit to my boss at the time, John Gaborik. I get a text from Matt Conway. My wife just went to labor. Like, literally 6 weeks early. Yeah. And he's like 2 weeks later, he's like, well, that was the sign I needed to leave.
Yeah.
So, it was my decision. I gave up a 6-figure salary for no guarantee. We didn't start doing anything until 30 days in January, and we didn't start the NWA until June. But it was a decision to not sit in negative energy. And that company is very bad negative energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of a situation where it was so... I really hope someday somebody writes a book about that company, because it would make a case study in sociopathic behavior and bad business, which and certainly my head should be examined for trying to buy the company. But that said, when we came out of that situation, I think both of us kind of took a deep breath and said, okay, well, we obviously have a desire. We've seen enough energy and remember, this is all before all the elite stuff and all this.
Right.
Particularly with the Hardys and the Deletion series, we saw that there was kind of a new voice in wrestling that wanted to be heard. We saw enough energy for the things that we did get over in TNA, that there was a new type of wrestling fan out there that wanted something slightly different. So we started there. We at least had that empirical information. And then we sat there and said, okay, do we want to even do something? And if we did, what would it look like? And we just kind of, we rotated around ideas and eventually settled on the idea that maybe buying an August brand like the NWA would be a good place to start, because, in essence, the story is already within it. And then once we got into all that, then we had to start untangling all the massive problems that were left from what was the NWA. And then, of course, then we had to turn to the marketplace and talk to people like you and sort of explain what we were trying to do. And because it didn't necessarily fall into we're running shows and, we're on, the network you never heard of and all that stuff, people would kind of look at us, not saying you, but people look at us like, don't really understand how that's going to work.
Because it wasn't the conventional wisdom. It wasn't the thing that anybody had done before.
Well, I got a lot of, the wrestling bubble has its way of talking, not necessarily with a unified voice, but you kind of get a message. And the message I got from it in the beginning was, well, if you're not going to blow money, we're not that interested.
Yeah.
In essence, blowing money equals activity.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I just came from a situation as somebody blowing money, and you see where that went.
Right.
And back to the TNA thing for a second. Think of the amount of money that TNA actually spent through the years. I don't know how much they spent as a company, a couple $100 million.
Mm-hmm.
For a brand name they kept trying to change but would never pull the trigger. They had incredible opportunities to actually move forward in the market and seem to blow themselves up every time they would actually get some traction. So, the idea that just blowing money equals some sort of success. So we kind of had to weather that first storm of like, what is it?
Well, do you think that the wrestling bubble thinks that blowing money is success, or do you think there's something about the wrestling bubble that says, oh, there's money over here. If I can get behind this, maybe I can have some of it?
I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah.
It's proof of concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're not serious unless you're blowing money, and if you're not blowing money, then you must not be serious. We realized that that marketing was going to be the key. If you remember, there were podcasts that came out the day that we announced that I bought the NWA brand name. What did he buy? And by the way, let me interject. The brand was so worthless on the open market that WWE didn't even want it, and they could have had it for a song and just thrown it in their storehouse of brand names that they own that they don't do anything with.
Right.
They could have got it with. They had talked to Bruce Tharp about buying the Houston library that we have the license on, and they decided wasn't even worth. As a throw-in on this library, they decided not even to buy.
Right.
So,
I mean, it could have just been buy the name, throw the title in the warehouse when we're done.
Yeah. And, it's been a lot of hard work, and it's been us. Our team has been very small, and if you see my DMs, the amount of people that are looking for work, I have the same people email me every time we make an announcement, and then I don't hear from them, like Billy says, until there's money. And a lot of people who are on our show believe in us. I would say 98% of the people that we booked in the show never asked about the money when we booked them. It wasn't about the money, it was about the opportunity, but we communicated that to them.
Yeah.
And they understood that this is a real chance to do something completely different. And, if we would have booked a 4,000-seat arena and papered it and done just what everybody else did, I don't think it would have the impact. And as much as it's retro, he said it to me last week on last week's show. The show feels like it's Instagram, where you're literally segment by segment going through, and it's designed that way. As retro as it is, we live in a communication world where people watch things 30 seconds to 90 seconds to 2 minutes at a time, and only our main event is longer than a normal segment.
You know what's great is the little details that there's no dead space between transitions, that the transition hits as the last word is still being said.
Yeah,
So,
I sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
I
no,
will literally, because he sends me a rough cut of the show, and then I give my notes. I will literally write him on the time code and go get out a second earlier on the segment.
Yeah.
I want the show to move so fast
because that's what it feels
it's like a whatever what was that offense
The hurry up offense.
Hurry up offense. Yeah, we're like the hurry up offense of wrestling.
Well, but it's never it never hurts the story.
Never.
It's like the Russo Crash TV. Like, it's not that, and everyone has their opinion on Vince. Vince did a lot of very good, unique things in the 90s, and I think the format does always need to evolve. So here we took a format from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and everyone's like, oh, it's an old school format. Yeah, but it's run at a 2020 pace. And
go back and watch an old Georgia Championship Wrestling and watch the pace of that show. Everybody thinks it's retro. You'll learn in about 5 minutes it ain't that.
I would say 30 to 70% of those old shows were garbage. Cable was the C show. It was about the syndicated show, and that was just an afterthought show. So taking a format and in a communication platform. YouTube is an afterthought for 90% of wrestling companies.
Right.
It's we'll just put that on YouTube. The worst, when I was at WWE, it was take everything off YouTube. And because a lot of big companies, Viacom, all fought this wave that we're going. And, we're early but late to this format. There are a lot of very talented YouTubers are making a lot of money. And our growth on the platform, I gave him some predictions of numbers as we keep growing. I mean, we do, every episode's done over 200,000 views. We have 150,000 subscribers. An average channel like a Peter McKinnon, who's a really great photographer, I think he has 4 million followers or subscribers. His videos do 300,000.
Yeah.
So we're figuring out, we're getting people to come that aren't even YouTube people. And, as we grow and we get in front of more people, I think the show will continue to grow, and it's really interesting.
And what's funny is, I think that the number one platform for cord cutters that have, internet live television instead of cable is YouTube TV. So it gets to the point where you start to really blur that line of, what really makes this a YouTube thing and not a TV show.
It's started to kind of create my own question, but it will be interesting to see if we can find ourselves in a place where we don't need a network to support us.
Yeah.
If we can create if you remember when TNA first started with Jarrett, they were running the pay-per-view model.
Yes.
Which I was interested in just from a consumer point of view. It was $3 to watch an episode or whatever. And I would watch a lot of them because I wanted to support the idea that they were trying to do something different as far as the marketplace. So I think we're in that same position where we might be in a situation where we can continue to grow the NWA, be able to do live shows, and not actually have to serve any particular master as far as a network would go. I talked to somebody quite powerful recently whose name I won't drop, but they were talking about whether I wanted to be on a network, and I said, yeah, but I don't want to give up all the freedom that I have. I love the freedom that I have. And they joked and said, yeah, but it would be nice to get that check. And I said, yeah, well, I don't see anybody throwing around that kind of money, even, from what we know about the Tony Khan deal. I mean, he's heavily invested in his side of the deal with Turner. And that's what most of the deals that are available out there is. You've got to come in with some serious capital or some serious cash, because networks just aren't going to write those checks anymore, because they'd rather have a show that they have total control over and total IP on.
Right.
Where wrestling's always a bit of a weird thing for a network, because who are we in business with? And you've got all these independent talents and this old construct of the independent contractor. So yeah, I mean, when I've done network deals, I mean, all they care about is their IP, because what they want to be able to do is turn to their boss and explain to them how they're going to make money off all the mugs and the T-shirts and all that type of stuff. So not having complete control on IP
and the future streaming rights and the
that's why anybody entering the market, including Tony Khan, is going to learn the one thing that Vince McMahon figured out 35 years ago, where if you don't have enough social brand leverage in the marketplace, you cannot control the marketplace like Vince has controlled it all these years.
Yeah.
And whether it's AEW, whether it's the NWA, whether it's Sam Roberts Wrestling, we're all going to have to figure out how to create a new economy, because that network economy is very, very difficult to navigate if you don't have the history and the leverage and the cash flow that Vince does.
Well, I mean, it's very, very clear to me, and I think you guys figured it out early by doing 10 Pounds of Gold on YouTube and figuring out a way to, okay, we're going to have this champion that we send from show to show, but the narrative is going to be through these YouTube videos that anybody can watch. They're short enough that you can watch them whenever you want. And, I mean, it goes back to, what we're doing here. I work at Sirius, but I'm also pretty well aware of the podcast industry and the amount of people that are not sitting there going oh, I just need to get a radio show, because they figured out that you could do a podcast and do whatever you want. And if it's good enough...
And basically, outside of being offensive, pretty much say whatever you want.
Say whatever you want. If you can get an audience... And you're even moving past the ad sales model of these people that are making huge livings on services like Patreon and stuff like that, where it is completely...
Or even just merch.
Yeah, exactly.
We
right.
built we're selling commercials on our show now, and High Spots is the first real sort of vendor that they made a commitment of 6 weeks of commercials that we produced for them. It wasn't just send us commercials.
Right.
Now they want to be in our world, and more people are coming forward. So I think that's what's interesting about people supporting this. And it's interesting, people talk about the AEW WWE war. The real war is the streaming services, because about 3 or 4 years ago, pirating was way down when Netflix was the only place to get content. And pirating is starting to go up because as more content gets siloed behind these walls, with Apple having their service, which has been number-wise is not Disney Plus. Disney Plus has 10 million subscribers in the first week. Apple Plus has 300,000, and they're Apple. Amazon. You have all these places fighting. YouTube is the only free place to really go and get content, and I think the market always decides where they're going to watch and goose stuff. And for us, this is the best place because we are growing an audience. Nick and Camille were at the big event this past weekend, and the amount of energy that they both communicated to us was 10 to 20 times bigger than an appearance they had pre-Power.
Yeah.
And we pushed it on our show with a commercial, but it's interesting to have people come up and just every day after the show, like the hashtag, it's insane how people are watching the show. It's not, if you don't watch it on Tuesday, like if AEW airs on a Wednesday, that's when you watch it, and it's weird how people are watching this on their time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to blow smoke, and if it wasn't true, I just wouldn't bring it up, but I was kind of taken aback because, when I do the wrestling podcast, there's plenty of stuff that I don't talk about. There's so much wrestling, when you can't talk about everything. I was really surprised at the amount of people that were like, when are you going to talk about Power? When are you going to talk about Power? When are you going to talk about Power?
God
and I was
bless
like,
God bless them.
Yes.
This is a thing.
Keep on them.
Yeah. What do you when you talk about the figuring out the NWA, right? When you first come on board and you start to fix everything first and start to put the investment back in the brand so people take the brand seriously. What do you consider the lineage of current NWA? How much responsibility do you take for what came before you?
Are you talking about in the recent years or like say the beginning of the decline in the 80s? I mean,
well, like what do you when you guys say this is NWA Power? What does the NWA in your head? Is it everything we've known, the ups, the downs, everything,
yes.
or it's everything?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You're taking ownership of everything.
And I would point to my own musical life as an example of that. It's amazing to me how many people celebrate periods in my musical life that I was told at the time were the worst. Because the people that identified with those periods, whether because they liked what I was doing or because they saw something in it or they even appreciated that I was fighting through, that period because it was a tough period for me, it's amazing how if it's their period, they don't care that there was another period that was bigger. So there are those people that are, their connection to the NWA, didn't start in 1978. It started in 1998. And I think trying to respect all of that and sort of celebrate more the survival of the brand. Anything that survives in this world past 70 years is pretty wild. I mean, how many brands could you think of, that you don't know the name of, like a Sara Lee or a Disney or a GM Motors or whatever, you know what I mean? That there's something that you cannot mess with when you're talking about 70 plus years of a brand. Just the endurance becomes part of the story.
Well, and we talk to everybody, and we both grew up with it, and Power to me is the last, what you remember strongest when the NWA was strongest. It's that 1985-86 Turner TBS 605 show.
Right.
That's we leaned into that because it's, one, the audience is still there. I was 10 to 15 years old when that show was big. I'm now in my 40s, so I may bring my kid to that. My dad and my grandfather took me to the NWA. I saw Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair in Philadelphia, and I watched the 605 show. So for us, it was identifying, all right, where's the gap? And, there's a lot of discussion of lapsed fans, and there's variances of, like, when WCW closed, those people just stopped watching. They didn't go watch WWE because that wasn't their home team. They were the Atlanta Falcons. They lived and died with their home team. And, there are plenty of people. At the peak of the wrestling wars, there were 10 million people watching on a weekly basis. But you have to think there were another 5 to 10 million on top of that came in and out. And so it's really unique of what's out there. And so our bet was at $1 to $1. We run amazingly lean. We don't have an office. We don't have a this. We don't have a that. We don't have a chief marketing officer. We do it all because as we scale, this product is, we're so much closer than people think to being a very scalable product. And, I ran the numbers for him on Power. I was like, we're maybe 6 months away from really being profitable with this show on our own without having to take an investment from anybody. And it may be even faster than that. So it's really interesting to watch this grow just on us because we've been told no everywhere else we've been. And Otherwise, we do something else.
Yeah.
He sold 400,000 tickets last year for the Smashing Pumpkins, and he can do anything else. He cares about it, and I think the guys feel it, and now I feel it, that this show is everything we want it to be. And I think fans resonate with, wow, this is something I never knew I really needed again. And I think that's why it works.
Yeah, the exciting part, I think, will be is if we can continue to grow and scale up, and so, for example, if we found ourselves in the opportunity where we were able to run a bigger program like Dynamite or Raw or something like that, how would we innovate in that space? We don't have those discussions yet because we're a far way away. But we do feel strongly that when we're given the right opportunities, we will be able to create our own unique brand in the space, and those are most of the discussions that we have. Is that it's like arguing about cookies. When I was a kid, if anyone remembers Famous Amos, I love Famous Amos cookies, so I wrote Famous Amos, and he sent me personally a bag of cookies, and I got a letter back. Unfortunately, I lost the letter somewhere along the way, but it's like arguing about who's got the best hamburger, who's got the best cookies. Wrestling's a really vast universe, and there's room for everybody. So yeah, we don't see it as counter to anything. We just see it in addition to, and I think the market will continue to grow. I think the entertainment business, which obviously I've been a part of for over 30 years, I've been told repeatedly over the last 7-8 years that wrestling has no growth. Repeatedly.
And as somebody who's just followed the industry, that's insane.
But that also shows you that just because we live in this bubble, they don't live in that bubble. And so their perspective on wrestling from the outside, so it takes things like the WWE going on Fox for them to go, they read it in Variety, and they go, oh, something's happening.
I had a conversation with somebody over at WWE that was talking about people when they were making a push to be talked about for the whatever the TV awards are, the Emmys, yeah. And I mean, this was within the last couple of years. Somebody at the Emmys or somebody in that space went, "You guys do a live show every week?" And you're just like, how?
Yeah,
like
millions of people watch.
Yeah,
and trends every week. Number one on Twitter and stuff.
It's been 20 years.
But that's what I'm saying is sometimes we in the business we don't realize that the mainstream world continues to basically not care.
Mm-hmm.
And WWE more than anybody has created that narrative that wrestling can survive and thrive in the bigger ecosystem. John Cena being in movies, The Rock being the #1 movie star in the world. There is a crossover marketing ability, but we're still a long way away from being accepted as a mainstream entertainment option. So I'm not saying we have work to do. I'm not trying to be rah-rah. What I'm trying to say is there are a lot of people out there that don't like wrestling, right? So let's set them aside. But there's a lot of people out there that don't even know if they'd like wrestling because they're just not exposed to it because culturally it's presented to them as something archaic. It doesn't get the modern advantage that other sports endeavors do. And as more and more people cut the cord, the networks in particular are realizing they need live event television to keep those viewers staying on broadcast television, which is why I've said to all those people in the meetings over the last 8-10 years that people will come back to wrestling on mainstream television because it's destination TV, and that will never change.
Yeah. So Into the Fire is like 3 weeks and change, I guess, away more or less.
Yeah.
What is the feel going to be like for that show? Is it going to feel like a pay-per-view live version of what we see on TV in the studio? Is it going to feel more like?
Yeah, so we'll have a different sort of entrance.
Yeah.
So the guys will come down from the stairs. Mm-hmm. We'll have entrance music because it is a pay-per-view.
Right.
There'll be longer matches, and it still will have a lot of the elements that people like with Power. There will still we won't have a backstage set where guys cut promos,
mm-hmm.
and it's still going to be the same room. But I think the audience will be part of the real story. And I went to ECW, and it's what I call the heyday of 95 and 96, where that room became, you wanted to go for the room, not the matches. And
mm-hmm.
I think we've built, to sell, I think we sold 306 tickets for the first 2 days. This time we've sold 750 for 3, and it's all based, we haven't announced one match for 3 days of events. People are now into it, and it's, mostly from Atlanta, but people are traveling in. So that pay-per-view is kind of this convergence of all these people that have watched it. and it's only going to grow. So I think we're really excited for this event, and I think we prove with Crockett Cup and NWA 70, we know how to put on events. We've done that. That's the easy part for us. It's all the other stuff that we have to figure out business wise to make it work. But this is the easy part for us.
I think the challenge will be, and I feel responsible, if I'm speaking to someone who will buy the pay-per-view, I feel responsible that if you like NWA Power, the pay-per-view has to feel like it's another gear up. That the live event aspect of it that will be available live, that the talent will know that they're being seen live, that warts and all, whatever happens is what's going to go out over the air. And I think that live audience will be heavily invested in representing what they want the world to know about the NWA, because there's a sort of hardcore element there that's emerged already. And I think it's going to be on all of us, to present something. So because look, on paper, it sounds a little bit strange. You're going to have a live pay-per-view event, but not in some place that, a curtained off arena with, 3,500 people lit a certain way. And we are capable of drawing, a lot of people. It'll be that house effect does that translate up to like a bigger pay-per-view feel, like a big blowout feel. So I think that'll be on us to see whether or not we can prove that.
Well, I think the live aspect is helpful too, because obviously, we're 6 or 7 weeks removed from the taping, and the fact that people are still there are spoilers on it, but it's weird. The show it's almost spoiler proof. Even if you read it, it doesn't feel like you know what's going on. And so for us to have a live event, and I think we'll have growth from it. And honestly, that for us to do the paper, someone's like, well, why aren't you running a bigger building? Well, it's a cost thing. It's a setup cost. So for us, if the pay-per-view works, we'll look into it. But for us, it's a chance to kind of get across the red and black line of where we are as a company. And I think people supporting us. We had a large amount of pre-orders the first day, and it's like you're pre-ordering a pay-per-view 3 to 4 weeks from now. That money's not. It's just interesting how people are supporting us, and I think it's because we've been sort of authentic in how we've reached for it. We haven't made grandiose claims. We're not in any kind of war. We're literally bringing something back that people loved.
Yeah.
And I think that's a responsibility we take. Just as if Billy bought Toys R Us and was going to open up a kitschy toy store, because that people have an attachment to these things that we grew up with. Sears one day will be a brand that people bring back in another way. Yeah,
it's a slightly divergent point, but I think one worth exploring in this context. I would have these discussions with Dixie Carter in particularly and John Gaburik. Let's call it the in the shadow of WWE problem. Mm-hmm. TNA was forever in the shadow of WWE. So me as being part of creative, and I was allegedly an executive, I would make these arguments like, why can't we present these programs in a different way? Why do we have to be WWE light? Well, if people don't see the pyro or they don't see this or that, they don't think it's legitimate. And I would say things like, yeah, but I've been to a lot of concerts where there was no production. It was a great concert. Or I've been to plays where obviously they'd spent nothing on the sets, but I was engaged with the narrative. Why can't we try to break this thing down and rebuild it some other direction so that when people look at our product, in this case it was TNA, they go, oh, there's something different happening here. You take people on a different journey. That comes from being a DIY musician that came out of the punk alternative goth scene or whatever. They just could not wrap their heads around it. It's like, if it doesn't look big, therefore it's not big, and I kept saying, but we don't have that kind of production budget, so people unconsciously are recognizing that you're the B program.
Right. Because it's a smaller version of what's going on over there.
Yeah, so in essence, so here's the thing on paper. If we present a world-class roster, wrestling balls out, to the best of their ability in a longer style pay-per-view match type of setting, in a hothouse setting with only 350 people in the building, in a small room, will that create something that you, on the other end as a consumer, Sam, will go, I'm enjoying this because it's giving me sort of a different feeling. Mm-hmm. It's not WrestleMania, but it's different and it's cool because it's this. Those are bets that most people are not willing to make in the marketplace because they find safety and commonality. Where my entire artistic life has been, I don't find any safety and commonality. Every time I've ever stood in the line that everybody else has stood in, they told me, you're not this enough. Your teeth are crooked or whatever. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You need to be, if you want to be in this world, you need to be more like everyone else. So my whole philosophy was generated if you're going to kick me out of your little world, I'm just going to do it my way.
Right.
And and so it'll be interesting whether our way will translate, and the feedback post pay-per-view will be like, okay, that's a worthy endeavor, or we'll look at each other and say that was a good effort, and now we know we're going to have to run more of a traditional pay-per-view model because it just doesn't translate as a bigger field.
Well, guys, I'm glad we did this.
Thank you, Sam.
Super, super glad we did this. I hope by now everybody has seen what NWA is doing over on the NWA YouTube channel. NWA Power is, of course, Tuesdays at 6:05 p.m. And it's a great show. It's an easy watch. It flies by. You find yourself like, I was ready to kind of scroll through and just like hit and there's no spot where you scroll because it goes back to your pacing.
We don't let you put, a reporter said, I didn't even pick up my phone, and it's my job to pick up my phone and take notes. That was just, it was the nicest compliment, because this is the show we want to watch, and it's built for an audience that is not being served, and in a grandiose WrestleMania in front of 70,000 people. Okay.
Sorry, it was 83,000 at MetLife, I believe.
Sorry,
but I was there.
But okay, well, we can't do that. So what can we do? And that's what we created the show for. And I think we're just so happy that people are liking it. And the fact that a new person finds it every day is great for us.
Yeah.
So that's the trajectory.
Well, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for being here,
Thank you,
Billy and Dave. Thank you.